All righty. Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to our ISPN conference. My name is Marissa Cohen, and I am the chair of the Service Providers Committee of the Immigrant Service Providers Network. And we would like to welcome everyone to our second annual conference and our first annual virtual conference, which is themed Immigrants in a Time of Upheaval. For those of you who are new to the ISPN, we are a network of 40 plus agencies in the St. Louis region, and our mission is to increase collaboration by providing opportunities for education and outreach to unite organizations that support the foreign-born and their families. We host a monthly meeting where service providers can network, and we convene committees where service providers from different agencies collaborate on initiatives. The conference is one example of a collaboration in action from the careful planning of the Service Providers Committee, as well as the presentations you will see from this week from individuals of various agencies, and the tremendous support in helping us convene today's gathering from the Deaconess Foundation. So thank you to the Deaconess Foundation for hosting this webinar so that we can have this virtual conference. We appreciate all the support that you've provided to us thus far. So in many ways, 2020 is a year of upheaval. I think we can all agree on that. We've spent months reimagining how we can continue to do the necessary work in our communities in this shifting landscape. And what you will hear this week are just a few examples of best practices of immigrant service providers. Just to give you a brief overview of the three-day conference, today's theme is Life at Home. This includes presentations that will address aspects of community necessary for thriving socially and economically. From housing to schools, we will present major areas of everyday life to consider when looking at the impact of COVID-19. Tomorrow's theme will address mental health and the response in a crisis. Lastly, on the final day of the conference, the presenters will discuss novel approaches to service provision. For the conference schedule, please visit our website, ispnstl.org. And there will be, just to let you know of the format, there will be a 10-minute break between each session so that we can ensure a smooth transition for speakers, facilitators, and so you get to grab another cup of coffee or tea, whichever is your preference. While we are unable to have the magic of networking and name tags that an in-person gathering would offer, we want you to feel free to engage with each other and the presenters using the chat function. If you have a question for the presenter, be sure to use the Q&A button that's located at the bottom of your screen on the Zoom window. Of course, we ask that we are respectful of one another and that we refrain from any harsh language or inappropriate comments. Each session will be recorded and available at a later date. If you are attending the conference for CEUs, social work CEUs, you will need to type your name in the chat at the beginning and the end of each session. This is how we will be taking attendance, and it is required to attend a full session in order to gain credit for that presentation. In approximately 2 weeks from Monday, you will receive your certificate from the Washington University's Brown School of Social Work. For all attendees, there will be an anonymous poll at the end of each session right before the break asking you to evaluate the presentation. Also, at the end of each day of the conference, all attendees will receive a link to complete an evaluation of their experience during the conference. This will help the ISPN make adjustments so that each year our conference gets better and better. And after all, this is just our second year. So with all of that being said, we hope that you gain new tools, techniques, and insights into what service provision during a time of upheaval means for the immigrant and refugee community. And at this time, we will jump right into the first session of our conference. So welcome to everyone. All righty. At this time, I am going to place in the chat the title of today's session and our presenter. Our first session of the day is Freedom from Domestic Violence, a Human Rights at Home Movement by Lauren Bartlett. And I will ask that everyone who is attending for the social work CEUs, please place your names, first and last name, in the chat at this time.
Thanks, Marissa. This is so exciting. I'm so happy to be the first presenter and so happy to be here today to talk to you all. I'm going to talk about freedom from domestic violence as a human rights movement. But first, I'm going to give you some background, talk a little bit about me and what I do, and talk about domestic violence in Missouri, in the immigrant community, and worldwide. Then we'll move into some strategies for preventing domestic violence and providing greater safety to survivors of domestic violence. So my name is Lauren Bartlett, and I am Assistant Clinical Professor of Law and Director of the Human Rights at Home Litigation Clinic at St. Louis University School of Law. I am a former legal aid attorney, and I spend most of my time now supervising law students who are working on cases in my clinic, the Human Rights at Home Clinic at St. Louis University School of Law. Students provide free legal services to immigrants in the St. Louis region and also work on some other types of cases as well. They get the chance to sometimes interact with human rights legal systems, including the United Nations and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. So I have my contact information here. Don't worry, you're going to see it again. But if you do want to get a hold of me, I would love to hear from you. Or if you have a case that you want to refer, right? We're always taking on new cases, looking for civil cases, immigrants who are living in poverty. So it could be a domestic violence protection order, but it could also be credit card or money judgment or housing issue, all kinds of things, workers' rights, right? Lots of workers' rights issues right now during the pandemic. Okay, so let's jump right into talking about intimate partner violence, or we also termed domestic violence, right? I'm going to use these terms interchangeably throughout this presentation. They're pretty much broadly used interchangeably to describe abuse or aggression that occurs between current and former spouses and dating partners. So domestic violence can also encompass child or elder abuse or abuse by any member of the household. So that's sort of the differentiating factor between intimate partner violence and domestic violence. But the terms are used to describe dating violence or violence between spouses pretty interchangeably. So before we talk about domestic violence in immigrant communities or in Missouri generally, right, I wanted to look at nationwide statistics, right? So about 1 in 5 women and 1 in 7 men, right, report having experienced severe physical violence from an intimate partner in their lifetime, right? In terms of any kind of sexual violence, we have 1 in 5 women still and 1 in 12 men, right? So lots and lots of folks, so high number of people experiencing physical violence from an intimate partner in their lifetime. More statistics. So 35% of female survivors of women and 11% of men who've experienced intimate partner violence experience some sort of physical injury, right? So there's a physical health issue related to the intimate partner violence. 1 in 5 homicide victims are killed by an intimate partner. Over half of female homicide victims, period, right, are killed by a current or former male intimate partner. And then when an abusive partner has access to a gun, domestic violence victims are 5 times more likely to be killed, right? The last statistics we have here is 60% of mass shootings in the US were either domestic violence attacks or committed by men with histories of domestic violence. So guns play a big role with perpetrators of domestic violence and leading cause of death when we're talking about severe and heightened domestic violence situations. So let's turn to Missouri in particular. So this chart, it's a little hard to see, but shows the demographics of domestic violence in Missouri in 2017. So this is a little bit older, but looking at 2017. So I have the light blue is white, the orange is black, and then we have Hispanic, which is the sort of yellowish one, multiracial, Native American, right? So 58% of domestic violence survivors white, 27% black, 7% unknown, 3% Hispanic. So this is compared to the overall demographics in Missouri, right? 79% white, 12% black, 4.4% Hispanic, 2.4% multiracial. So you can see, especially in the African-American Black community, right, heightened levels of domestic violence, maybe a little bit lower, at least in terms of those receiving services in the Hispanic community, right? I also wanted to mention this second part here, which is Missouri is only second to Alaska, right? Alaska is #1, Missouri is #2 in the United States for the per capita rate of men killing women, right? I actually saw that in a newspaper article this morning in the St. Louis Dispatch about domestic violence in Springfield, Missouri. Wanted to sort of add that in. Okay, so let's talk now about domestic violence in the immigrant community. There's not as much data available right out there. We need more data is what I'm trying to say. But in terms of what we do have, right, I found a study from 2006. So this is quite a few years ago, but 1/2 of immigrant women in the US are estimated to have experienced domestic violence firsthand. So higher levels of domestic violence. Remember, we had 1 in 5 women. Generally across the US, we have more than half, right, of immigrant women. And then these numbers are even higher among women who are married to immigrant partners as opposed to dating partners or so not unmarried or married to non-immigrant partners, right? So high levels of domestic violence, more than 1 in 2 women in immigrant communities experiencing domestic violence. Oh, I skipped one. So we also know that intimate partner violence is worsening during the pandemic, right? During COVID-19 lockdown, but also just generally over the last 8 months, right? So there's lots of reasons why this might be happening, right? More than I've even put down here, right? Women and just people stuck at home with abusers, right? During lockdowns, right? We're looking at lockdown in the county, right? Lots of cities seeing even more restrictions on movement. In the last couple of weeks, we also saw lockdowns in March and April, right? So stuck at home, right? Can't leave except to go get food, exercise, etc. Greater stress and anxiety, right? Lots of stress this year. We all know that 2020 continues to be a stressful year. And then, domestic violence survivors disconnected from usual support systems, from community, whether that's because of everybody working at home, because doctors' offices, community organizations were not functioning in person, or still aren't functioning in person for the most part, right? Disconnected. Then we also have the economic downturn, unemployment, also, right, causing stress, leading to intimate partner violence. Maybe you have other reasons that you think of or can think of in terms of why intimate partner violence might be worsening during the COVID-19 lockdown. Please feel free to share if you want in the chat box, if you can think of or want to share some additional reasons, right? Why, especially in the immigrant community, intimate partner violence might be worsening during the COVID-19 lockdown. These are just some reasons I've seen and were mentioned in this study that I'm citing here. So I was trying to find, I had seen all kinds of articles saying intimate partner violence was worsening during the COVID-19 lockdown. There really hadn't been much written about it, too many studies in terms of actual data and numbers, right? But I did find this study out of Boston from May 2020, from this year, right? In this Boston study, they found a higher incidence of physical intimate partner violence, both in absolute numbers and proportion, in terms of numbers of women coming forward, and then the proportion of women who were reporting physical intimate partner violence. And then also found more severe injuries, with the suspicion that victims were reporting to healthcare facilities in the later stages of the abuse cycle, right? So severe abuse, right? So many women skipping appointments with primary care physicians, only going when it's an absolute emergency to seek treatment for injuries. So I will say that I was hoping to find a little bit more data about domestic violence in the immigrant community during the COVID-19 lockdown, and more recently. There, again, just isn't too much data available out there. There's quite a few studies that are being done, and we will later have, maybe next year, maybe the year after, have some more data. But I think that, you know, that's really important data to have. Is something that I'm going to talk about a little bit later, but I wasn't able to come up with in terms of numbers or find some studies that have been published in terms of worsening domestic violence or occurrences of domestic violence during COVID-19 in immigrant communities. So, right, at the international level, I'm a human rights attorney. I like to look both domestically, locally, and internationally. So also internationally, this is a problem, right? We're seeing worsening intimate partner violence, not just here in the US, not just here in Missouri, right, but across the globe. The UN Secretary General Guterres, right, earlier this year tweeted, right, that peace is not just the absence of war. Many women under lockdown for COVID-19 face violence where they should be safest in their own homes. He's appealing for peace in homes around the world and urging governments to put women's safety first as they respond to the pandemic, right? As we know, right, across the globe, this definitely hasn't been a priority in the last 8 months, but the same problem, right, worsening intimate partner violence faced by women during the pandemic across the globe. Okay, so now that we've established the scope of this problem, right, we see this as a big problem, domestic violence, intimate partner violence. Here in Missouri, yes. Within immigrant communities, yes. Maybe even a worse problem within immigrant communities, worsening during this pandemic, right? So let's talk a little bit about solutions and strategies for preventing intimate partner violence. And I am not going to purport to be expert on all of the solutions for preventing intimate partner violence. And many of you are working in this area and have much more expertise than I do, right? I focus on legal policy solutions. There are many more pathways for preventing intimate partner violence than just the legal policy pathway, right? And so I want to recognize that. I took this image, and this slide's a little bit fuzzy, but it's from a much larger one with a list of strategies that the Center for Disease Control offers for preventing intimate partner violence. Among those strategies include teaching safe and healthy relationship skills, engaging influential adults and peers, disrupting development pathways towards violence, creating protective environments, strengthening economic supports for families, and last but not least, supporting survivors to increase safety and lessen harms. And this is the strategy that I want to focus on today. And as you can see, it's just part of this much larger picture, right? And as a lawyer, as a human rights attorney, right, again, I want to say that the types of things that I'm looking at and focusing on today are just one tiny piece of a much larger puzzle in terms of supporting survivors, in terms of preventing intimate partner violence. Okay, just want to make sure. Okay, so let's talk about a few policy legal ideas for increasing safety, lessening harms for intimate partner violence survivors. So lots of legal strategies out there for preventing violence. Here's an example. This is one that's come up recently. I mentioned that Post-Dispatch article on domestic violence in Springfield. That article focused on this, actually, on red flag laws. This is not a human rights strategy or policy, which I'm going to get to in just a minute, but just an example of another really good, I think, legal strategy. So these red flag laws, as they're called, allow police or family members to petition a state court to order the temporary removal of firearms from a person who may present a danger to others or themselves. So not just in the context of intimate partner violence, right? Whenever someone may present a danger to others or themselves and have firearms, have guns, right? Police or family members could petition the court to remove those guns from their possession. So Missouri does not have a red flag law that allows for this, right? The only time a judge at their own discretion, right, can order firearms be removed, right? But there is no process for family members or the police to petition to have firearms removed. So you can see on this map that I have here, we have some close by states who have these laws, including Indiana, including Illinois, right? I would also say that Kansas has some, at least at the more local level, county level, right? But here, statewide in Missouri, we don't have these, we don't have red flag laws. We don't have the ability for family members or police to take guns away, something we could consider, right? Especially when we see the links between mass shootings and domestic violence, between homicides, women being killed by intimate partners, right? Something to consider at the statewide level in terms of laws that we could pass. Okay, so now that I've given you one very legal strategy, let's talk about the international human rights strategies and the freedom from domestic violence human rights movement, which is sort of at the core of my presentation. So this case, the Jessica Lanahan case, is a Supreme Court case, and it's at the heart of the freedom from domestic violence human rights movement. So I'm going to talk to you about this case, tell you about the case, tell you about the court cases that followed the situation, and then I'll tell you how that leads into the bigger movement. So I'm going to start with the story that underlines this case, and there's some pretty tragic facts, and some child deaths involved. So I just want to give you that trigger warning. There are many other terrible domestic violence stories out there that are, parallel to this, but this happens to be the facts that underlie this case that went up before the US Supreme Court. So I'm going to tell you about it. So Jessica Lanahan lived with her 3 daughters in Castle Rock, Colorado. She was separated from her husband, the father of the 3 girls, and had a protection order against him, which covered her and her 3 girls, right? Barred him from unsupervised visits with the girls. One evening she's inside, she's cooking dinner, and the girls are outside playing, and all of a sudden, and this has probably happened to many mothers, right? But you stop hearing those cheerful voices, suddenly the girls are gone, right? She goes outside, they're nowhere to be found. She suspects her ex-husband, the father of the girls, has taken the girls, and she calls the police and tells them that she has a protection order. She thinks that the father of her children has taken the girls. Police say, oh, he'll be back, he'll be fine. He's the father. She calls back another hour later. She's frantic, right? She can't find the girls. She's called her husband. She's pretty sure she knows where he is, and she thinks he has the girls. Police send someone out to question her, but don't do any searching. Don't go to the ex-husband's house. Don't look for his car, right? Anything like that. Finally, she's been frantically calling calls 6, 7, 8 times. Nothing happens. She goes to the police station and tries to, begs the police to try and help her find the girls. And again, do nothing, right? The police don't do anything. Later that night, in the middle of the night, the ex-husband pulls up in front of the police station and opens fire on the police station. The police shoot back, and when the shootout is over, the police go out and they find the husband has been shot to death, and the bodies of the 3 little girls in the back of the pickup truck also shot to death. So Jessica sues the police department, and her case goes all the way up to the United States Supreme Court in 2005. So what she's trying to argue, right, is that the police had a duty to protect her and the girls, and that they didn't do anything, right? They took her statements, but there was no investigation. There was no searching for the girls. There was no enforcement of her order of protection. She also has some other arguments in there. For example, she never found out, there was never an investigation done as to who shot the girls. Was it the police during the shootout, or had her ex-husband shot the girls before he pulled up to the police station in the middle of the night? She never found out. To this day, she doesn't know the answer. So it goes up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court holds against her, says that a town and a police department have no constitutional duty to enforce an order of protection, right? This is one of those things where you're just heartbroken that our Supreme Court would say there's no constitutional right right? The police apparently don't have to enforce an order of protection, right? What are the police for? This gets back to our defund the police conversations we were having earlier this summer. But if they're not there to enforce an order of protection, then what are they there for, right? So this is good. This is still the law. This is what the Supreme Court said in 2005. Jessica was heartbroken, devastated, right? Took her some time, but she decided that wasn't enough, right? She wanted to keep fighting. She took her case and she filed a petition with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. It took a few years, but in 2011, she got a decision from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. They said that the girl's human rights to life had been violated. Jessica's right to investigation and truth, her right to truth had been violated, as well as rights to protection of women and girl children had been violated. Her human rights had been violated, right? She was able to tell her story to the commissioners who listened to her, agreed with her, right? In a way that she had never gotten the same vindication from the US courts. So when the commission's decision came out in 2011, right? Finally, we had this entity, this commission saying that that these orders of protection should be enforced, that there was a right to freedom from domestic violence, that there were rights to protection of women and girl children. And this started a movement, right? A movement to educate, which Jessica Lenahan has been a part of that movement, but it's spread from beyond her, right? But to educate about human rights to freedom from domestic violence and what our vision of the world, of the law, right? That it should be that a police officer has a duty to enforce an order of protection. It should be that women and girl children have a right to protection, right? And it's spread from town to town across the United States. It started with a law clinic passing a freedom from domestic violence resolution in Cincinnati, Ohio. So it was the city council that passed a local municipal ordinance, which we call a freedom from domestic violence resolution, right? Affirming the right to freedom from domestic violence. And some of these resolutions now, there's 36 across the United States, right? Some of them require police to enforce orders of protection, require police to also gather additional data on domestic violence, also require training and education on intimate partner violence for police. All of this, right? So many places now have these freedom from domestic violence resolutions. Like I said, Cincinnati, Ohio was the first. We have Iowa City, Iowa, Albany, New York, Austin, Texas, Miami, all over the country, right? And so not all of these are the same. They all sort of say different things, right? But it's so important that communities and folks who are working so hard to protect domestic violence are sort of vindicated in this way by these local cities and counties passing these resolutions. So this is an example of freedom from domestic violence resolution passed in Miami-Dade County, Florida, right? So this is the law that was passed, right? So the Board of County Commissioners seeks to enhance the public welfare by declaring the protection against domestic violence as a fundamental human right. And then goes on to say the board expresses its intent to join world leaders and leaders with the United States with the recognition of domestic violence as a human rights concern and declares freedom from domestic violence as a fundamental human right. And then charges all local government agencies to incorporate these principles in their policies and practices. So, you know, really a strong language in this one. But my hope and my thought here is to start a conversation, perhaps in St. Louis, right? So other places in Missouri as well, but at least in maybe the city or county, right? We could consider trying to pass one of these resolutions, recognizing that protection from domestic violence is a fundamental human right. One way of bringing this issue into the spotlight, and perhaps it could even focus on immigrant communities, right? How the severity of this problem in immigrant communities as opposed to just broadly. So this is sort of my trying to hype this idea in terms of perhaps we have some folks who might be interested in doing this, something my clinic could do. But again, right, there's 36 different resolutions that have been passed across the US. There's a full list on if you Google you can use this website here on the screen. You can also just Google Cornell and freedom from domestic violence resolutions, and you'll find the full list in the text of each of those resolutions that have been passed in the communities across the US. So I'm almost done, and I'll leave time for questions. So if you have questions, go ahead and start putting them in the chat box, and I'll get to them in just a couple more minutes. But I just wanted to sort of give you some background and explain that in case you may have heard me talk about human rights at the conference last year, or talk about what we do at the clinic at St. Louis University. But what we're trying to do, right, is we see human rights framework, human rights laws, as sort of in a lot of ways, an aspirational world that we want to get to eventually, that provide guidance for sort of what our US laws and state laws, federal laws and state laws could look like, right? And so when we do things like pass human rights resolutions, freedom from domestic violence resolutions, right? We're mirroring this, or we're getting closer to this aspirational vision of what our government could do and should do, right? And so this is just one example of that, but really there's lots of different ways to do this, but this is in the domestic violence context. Okay, so I'm going to pause there before I keep talking and talking and talking and make sure that I answer your questions. So hold on, I'll get to there's my contact information and my email and phone number in case you want to write it down. So I see some questions, and feel free to add in more, and I'll try and get to them one at a time. So the first one that I'm seeing here is, what are some reasons that lawmakers might not move forward with a domestic violence resolution, right? So yeah, there's lots of reasons. There's lots of things on lawmakers' plates, lots of things, and more conservative lawmakers have different priorities, more liberal lawmakers have different priorities, right? So we would definitely have to make this a priority and have some action on domestic violence be a priority. I think in places like St. Louis City, right, that it's an easier sell. So that makes it a little bit easier, right, where we have a recognition already of domestic violence being an issue and a problem, and something that folks in St. Louis City want to raise up and recognize as an issue. So there will be places, I think, cities, counties, that this would just be a non-starter, right? It would be not something we would even try, because we wouldn't think it would be a priority or would go anywhere. But I do think there are other places where there's already some recognition. We would just have to you know, lobby and make a good argument as to why this should be a priority. Could also do things like make it easy to draft language, right? Provide lots of statistics, all of that. Okay, more questions. Okay, so what would it take for us to work on passing something like this in St. Louis City or County? What would opposition be? Okay, so similar question. I think it would take, again, a draft, and then individually, well, one, we would want community support. So that would be the first thing, right? We would want to have a group of folks who are really interested in this and not just me. So some folks who really see this as a potential solution to a big problem, and would want to sort of get behind this. And then write some draft language and lots of meetings with individuals who we would want to persuade to take this up as a priority. So in the city or the county. I think that my clinic could help, my students can help in terms of drafting, but I do really think we would need some data, some stories from folks locally, and you know, we wouldn't want to just sort of do this without like coming from the community as something that should or could happen. We can also obviously point out that all these other cities and counties have done this. That is also very persuasive, I think, to certain city council members, commissioners, right? So something to think about. Okay, and then I've got a question. How can we support freedom from domestic violence resolution in Missouri? So I think it would be, you know, a matter of coming together and talking about this, maybe having a committee or a group of folks who are interested, something that we could start with a couple of meetings, but I guess just, you know, that would be what I would say. I think, yeah. Okay, so then let's see, one more question. Do we see something that would start at the municipal level first before aiming at the state? Yes, absolutely, at the municipal level. I think this is a much harder sell at the state level because you have so many more actors and priorities. That hasn't successfully yet in any state been passed at the state level, and you know, including, and I would also say, in terms of international human rights language, period, being used in statewide resolutions, that's not something that happens very often. Again, because there are so many players with so many different priorities, it's a much easier sell, I would say, at the local and county level. And then also a question, there's currently a commission on domestic violence and human trafficking appointed by the Supreme Court of Missouri. Would members of the commission be helpful? Right? Yes, I think definitely the members of the commission could be helpful. Again, this is something though that would have to, you know, I think best strategy would take place at the local or county level. So it would be more like those commissioners weighing in, supporting this, but in the local or county context. Yeah, these are great questions, and I'm glad that it seems to be folks are interested. There's all kinds of information on that website. Let me go back to the website so that you can see it. This website, the Cornell website, not only this list of and links to the resolutions that were passed, but also there's like a packet of information that one of the groups has developed to help you pass a similar resolution in your town or county, that's available on that website, and you know, lots of sort of like guidance. So what I'm saying is there's lots that's been, and there's articles that have been written on these resolutions and these procedures. So there's lots of information out there that we could take advantage of. I think the key here is bringing the right people together and, you know, again, convincing the local decision makers that this is something that we want to do.